Okay, hello everyone, welcome to another episode. Quick announcement, there will be one more episode, then the videos will be only accessible to members, the live streams. I wanted to speak about two ideas which I feel have to do with the event of the life of human beings. You know, when a person, I always think this before I give these episodes, and I always think, if I was listening to myself, what am I hearing? And I thought that really a person can speak about three modalities. There's three modes of communicating phenomena. One, we are talking about the past. One, we're talking about the present. One, we're talking about the future. So three avenues where a human being can comment on, really. Now, for this episode, I have chosen the future. So this episode is, in a sense, Mr.Within's views on what will happen in the future and what will happen to a capitalistic system, and in some sense, what will happen to a capitalistic system that is fueled by information. You see, it's hilarious. We're living in a world now where everybody is chasing money, but money comes where information is, and what we do with the information suggests the reality. It's as if everything on some level is energy, and this energy is being directed by conscious human force. So I am pretty much wondering about the future of conscious human beings in whatever systems that we find them in now. Now, capitalism is a very giant topic. There are literally professors on that specialize in just this field. But ultimately, it has to do with something historic that has happened. A series of historic events have taken place, and we find ourselves in the current moment, in this current era, where money and information are like oxygen for us. Excuse me. So, and also before I begin, I want to share two quotes. One quote is from William Pollard. He says, "Information is a source of learning, but unless it is organized, processed, and available to the right people in a format for decision making, it is a burden, not a benefit." And then we have a quote from Albert Einstein. Where Einstein says, "Intelligence is not the ability to store information, but to know where to find it." So, I'll begin like this by saying, let's look at human evolution. What do we notice that has happened on this earth? That means if I'm going to talk about the future, let's start from the past, come to the present, and then go to the future. In the past, we know personally, not personally, but we know, like it's in some sense very obvious that human beings had less of a ability to process information. And so the earlier we go back in time, the more we find human beings living in accordance to the faith of instinct. That means the animal had faith in its instincts and the energetic expression went forth, right? Because we are a creature not only being moved by the intelligence of the world, we can respond to the movement of the intelligence of the world. That is an evolutionary advancement that many other species don't. We in some sense can engage and can interact with information. Now, what we see is that human beings evolved, an object became a subject to itself, consciousness became an individual. When consciousness became an individual through its behavioral communication, a language of experiential being, right? From that language, it in some sense developed as a linguistic simulation in the sense that right now, sounds become meaning. Right now, I'm just a creature, realistically, like if you were a Zen master looking at this moment, I'm just a human being making noise. But this noise has a value to the listener. But what is its value? Its value is based on their ability to recognize the sounds. And suddenly it's like words of meaning, worlds of imagery. These become activated upon understanding. There's a reason why they say the most important thing in life is not to just live it quickly, but in some sense to understand what was happening when it was happening. Now, sorry guys, I'm a bit nasally today. There's going to be pauses in the middle of this episode. But anyways, so the human being in its past reached the point of becoming an information processing subject while still maintaining the survival of the object. So we're pretty much like, life has two components really. What does my body do, which is survival, which is the you would say the most important understanding of how to maintain the body. The body has to reach the next day. That means regardless of who you are on this planet, whatever story, meaning, conception of life you have, in some sense, it's like we are racing against time, and to get to the next day is an achievement, to a point where I feel in the future, civilization, like a lot of corporations, at the end of the day, they will all just clap. Can you imagine a team functioning throughout the day, and then at the end the team appreciates its own presence? I would say we find ourselves in a capitalistic system, and so there's many people, I can't tell you how many conversations with postmodernist liberal people I've had and I've witnessed even, where when it came to capitalism was the enemy. But the issue is not that capitalism is the enemy. Anything that has corruption within it becomes a disadvantage for the species. It doesn't matter if it's a capitalistic system. It doesn't matter if it's your local restaurant and the chefs are corrupt, and they're not clean or whatever, right? Like that's a possibility, Chef Ramsay knows this. and so what it is that any system where there is you would say destructive intent eventually becomes a corrupt system. Why? Because destruction is to get ahead. That means there is no logical reason why something should not exist unless it's an obstacle. But the viewpoint that something is an obstacle is self-interpreted, right? So we are generating, overlaying physical reality with subjective meaning, then acting as if that subjective meaning is the ultimate, is the actuality, and behaving that way. People think being polite is easy. Being polite means to, in some sense, be able to see beyond your subjective overlay of the world, I would say. It's a state of mind that cares for what else is moving aside from its own initiative, In a capitalistic system, there is freedom, and I think pretty much the whole world may know about, the kind of political spectrum, how there is, in some sense, you can divide it into 3 points, right? Where there is the socialist middle point in some sense, then there is in some sense the capitalistic point, and then there is the communist, or the point where the positioning of power is being divided. That means one system of thought from the human mind is like, all right, we all need equality, but we need a bigger brother to do the equality, you know. In other systems, there's like, we don't need a bigger brother, everybody is their own, you know. So there is something in life that there is, of course, advantages and disadvantages to political systems. What that means is it's the same with consoles, video game consoles, you know. Like a person who buys, let's say, for example, an Xbox, you know, or, you know, a remote control console, they get access to different activities, different availabilities of a cyber experience compared to someone who, for example, plays video games using a computer. You know, so the system suggests the outcome. Now the system has a geometry. Everything has a geometry. Even me, when I speak, if people have listened to me for a while, they will understand that I am just walking through certain geometrical relationships in my perception of reality when I am in some sense animating a story out of it. The thing is that information is actually everywhere. It's just how does this information become complex, and in its sophistication of intelligence, how does it administer its vitality, right? So what it is regardless of whatever kind of economical, let's say monetary or even political system or of thought or structure we have going on in civilization, we will never be able to ignore at the end of the day, it's just creatures trying to get by, right? So it's as if it's like the humanist dimension, which currently is escaping our politics and our academia. Do you know, life has been turned into stuff, and stuff can be very easily let go, and that is in some sense the issue, right? Now, one thing I have personally not seen from any political system is its humility to acknowledge that it will never be as up to date as its most advanced citizen. That means this is something where, this is my personal theory, you know, I was looking at political systems and I'm like, okay, what's up with politics in today's world? Then I realized what is up with politics is that people's consciousness through the new information era, you know, is in some sense increasing. So people are way more informed than before, which means the political systems have to update every day, right? That means we having presidents and elections every 4 years. This is in some sense completely a slow strategy. That means a faster strategy would be probably in the future AI coming into play, and human beings in some sense no longer having leaders. Pretty much all the resources of governments will become resource stations. What I'm trying to say is that when one goes towards the efficient, there is no concept of sacrifice, there is the concept of dissolution though. You know, some things in life have to dissolve so there is space for other you know, solutions in the realm, right? For example, if I gave one Mr.Within talk and I never let my perspective change from the first talk I gave, it would be in some sense, you know, a missing out of all the other variations of perception that one can access to, right? And in a capitalistic system, of course, remember, as I was saying, every system has an advantage and a disadvantage. Even me giving these talks right now, there is an advantage and disadvantage to it. The disadvantage is in some sense I am making myself vulnerable and pretty much sharing my mind, you know, with the universe. That's a sort of disadvantage in the sense of what the response can be. And in regards to the advantage of, for example, giving these talks, it is sharing imagery which some other people on the planet somehow may be able to utilize to advance something in their reality, because ultimately it's a giant question mark where we are reacting to like an exclamation point. So, in a capitalistic system, we cannot ignore the position of society, and we cannot ignore the hunter-gatherer mentality. Anytime a person forgets that we were hunter-gatherers, it's so easy to go against capitalism, right? Because it's all about the administration of the tribe to its freedom. The situation is, we have made the planet Earth a Hunger Games. And what I mean by that is that the human position has to fight, poetically for its freedom, for its existence, right? Not only do we have various political systems, battling it out, but we also have winners in the political system, and that's so crucial because what have human beings been conditioned in? Right, so just like how we know, like in human psychology, we say a person has a conditioning. Everybody has. That means everybody is conditioned by how their eyes have opened to the world and how their memory has stored the information of the world to accept the world in certain emotional levels. Do you know? Unless a speaker brings in novelty, right? Brings in a shock factor. Right, so that's the cool advantage of speaking about the future. You may suddenly tap into probabilities of reality that were always there but invisible before. We say we want to build, a world that is not just here, but it is a world for the people. Right, and what that means is the most important currency should not be considered as money. It should be considered as awareness, vision, right? Because we are creatures where what did we do after we occupied physical territory? We went to conquer subjective territory. What happened after we made our beliefs and acceptances of the system, right? Eventually it will just go to the awareness that made the phenomena be there in the first place, right? So reality to me is actually from a physical position going to more and more a non-physical position as we discover how universal intelligence is also rooted unconditionally. You know what it is? It's as if attention is rooted in space. And its roots are so deep that after some point one cannot see the roots of their own intelligence, so they become an abyss to themselves. Now, society, from the time of the hunter-gatherer motion, from the time that we behave like hunter-gatherers, there was role orientation. That means when we look at a tribe, that every member of the tribe had a role or eventually would have a role. And what society is like 8 billion human beings trying to live before they die, and an insane amount of subjective collisions and abstract warfare. And when I say abstract warfare, that means there is like physical reality, which is just existing. Everybody knows that. But beyond that existence, the subjective interpretism that happens not in a reductive physicalism, but again in a sort of substance dualism, right? So what that means is I'm looking at this planet and I'm like, all right, it is true, all human beings are on the same planet, hooray. But every person is experiencing their own version of the planet. That means even though we are in one common universe, we are all through our own universe experiencing it, right? And so the conditioning, I would say, of even systems, it's as if like imagine political systems being plants, and it's as if wondering in what soil was this seed planted in that such a tree developed, right? And I would say eventually in the tribal atmosphere, in the community atmosphere of the early human beings gathering around and chilling, you can say there was the camaraderie of being a same-looking species among other species. So I could totally see a sort of hidden human camaraderie just dormant in every person's DNA, in the sense that we were once fighting against other animals. Now we have kind of left the jungles and we have built the concrete jungle, and inside the concrete jungle we have built the language jungle, the linguistic simulation. Right? So we have, in some sense, probably by 2 degrees or 2 levels, it's as if 2 giant shifts in human intelligence caused us to forget nature. It's hilarious, but it's just 2 shifts, 2 gears back. I don't know if people understand what I'm saying. So what I'm trying to say is that in in any sort of tribal, in any sort of community, there is hierarchies, and hierarchies develop. This is what a lot of children who just go to school, as if the child is born into a world and it goes to school, right? So the child that goes to school doesn't understand this, right? Doesn't understand how there is simultaneously a linguistic positioning of meaning. Me personally, I'll tell you something about myself. I'm a person who's been, I don't know, the karma of the moment sometimes embarrasses me first, in situations, out of its grace, But there's been situations where I have been in and I have found myself in a conflict in, but at the same time, I could do nothing about aside from being a passenger in that moment, simply because I had no idea what the collective subjective overlay of the moment is. So I'll give you an example. Bilingual people who experience this. So when you speak a language, you actually have a way of interpreting reality to yourself. When a person goes to a new country, let's say you're an immigrant and you go to a new country and there's a completely new language, that new language is its own universe, and there will always be conflicting modalities of who we were yesterday and who we will be tomorrow, right? So that means even when it comes to political systems, we cannot judge their value, right? That means communism, for example, didn't work in our history. A reason was because man's moral nature was not at a point to be able to be equal. That means because we were greedy animals, no political system has in some sense expressed itself without being corrupt, because greed is there when physical survival becomes turbulent, That means it's as if in a fire, what do people do when a house is on fire, right? So they run out of the house. Now, if you imagine politicians being inside certain political systems, and in these political systems, they feel the political system's caught on fire, what do? They become the first to go out, and it means the faith of the movement in some sense weakens. So what I'm trying to say is, through our hunter-gatherer ways, we eventually, and through the development of language and individual consciousness and all of that, and being established in name and form, we managed, and through the advancement of the memory so far, how far our memories developed, we in some sense have created a hierarchical system. A hierarchical system is not a system that is good or bad, but good and bad are elevations, right? I am one of my biggest passions is, believe it or not, the concept of piloting, because I feel it can be applied to anything. And when I talk about piloting, I say that we are an unknown attention in a known world, and our free will is piloting how our eyes interact with reality. But in their interaction with reality, multiplicity finds us, right? Any person who's done a project for more than a few years, they will understand that any movement, any sort of expression on this planet, due to its new nature, due to being never before seen, will have a sort of karmic outcome. That means you could be a yogi, kind of living so purely in this life where you feel you have no karma, but the world has karma, right? So imagine the yogi's like, all right, I got rid of my own karma, I got self-enlightened, but what about the collective enlightenment? What about the understanding of nature, of itself? That is to me ancient technology. It's not the most advanced machines. To me, ancient technology was a relationship of the origin with the original source of being. That is divinity. What else can it be? So society, this system with endless human beings inputting information, eventually has come to a hierarchy. And something that many people don't recognize is that when you are younger, because you don't want to spend time to look at something through different angles, the mind moves through an absolutist way. And I personally find that, for example, women are way more absolutist than men. Do you know? And what that means is the significance of simple actions can suddenly feel like they're a declaration of the whole system, but it's not the case. So now the question comes, in a hierarchical system where it has turned into a sort of survival video game, having dimensions of language acquisition, and in some sense uh, just service, you know. For me, when I think about at least the concept of money, it is in the approach of that something has to update, something has to be served. You know, that means it is either a service or a product that can be monetized, really. And of course, moments can be monetized, like let's say a live event or a concert. But all of that goes under the category of service. So what I'm trying to say is we have a product and service-based economy where the hierarchies of meaning are status-oriented. Right? So what that means is, imagine in the future somebody creates a dictionary of popularity. When somebody does something, we go to that dictionary and we're like, okay, in the year 1920s, what this person did could have been popular, for example. You know what I mean? So it could be how we connect various moments of imagery with one another, but really it is an activity in a multidimensional system where the imagery input and output it's like a natural life cycle, just like how the body every 2 weeks, for example, cells change. They say like your body's cells, they change every 2 weeks. You know, the brain, it takes some years, for example. So if the cells of your body change every 2 weeks, that means we are not in the same body. And that means in our analysis of any system inside a changing world, it means the system is never there. So that means people may look at society and be like, yo man, what's up with this capitalism? But this capitalism is actually, it doesn't exist in the same sense that it, just like every day we wake up and we're a new self, every day the system expresses with a novel angle to itself, right? In the sense that new people enter, you know, the economy enter the world sphere. And people leave the world sphere. You know, that means I'm, for example, giving talks right now. I'll give you an example. For example, in I believe it was 1991, where Terence McKenna passed away. I could be wrong. Let me see. Oh, sorry. He passed away in 2000, you know. So Terence McKenna, I imagine he passed away in the year 2000, and he was in some sense a contribution to the advancement of communication in this realm. And the moment he leaves, somebody else, imagine, suddenly shows up, right? So what I mean is that even though it's a hierarchical system, it's a hierarchical system in constant flux, in a dynamism that is ever changing. So if people are honest with their input and they just have effort, which is another way of saying be concentrated when it comes to the future. You know, we have concentrated orange juice and we also have concentrated futures, you know. So there is no such thing as capitalism. There is just human beings inputting info into the system. Now the issue is of like sometimes we gotta ask ourselves, why doesn't society update? Like this is a question where I have asked so many times, and it has inspired a lot of my work with language. Was that I realized after nations developed a primary language. So what was going on the planet before nationalism was everybody was speaking their own language. Everybody was like acting, everybody was pretty much like, you could say how babies talk about with one another. It's as if they understand each other, but they're saying nonsense, right? So it's the same way that the early human beings, everybody was speaking their own dialect, but your body language, of course, can precisely communicate whatever, right? So the moment nationalism comes in, languages become singular, you know? And some nations, they struggle with this, some nations don't. For example, in China, there's I think there's 4 primary languages. You know, there's no such thing as Chinese, but there's in some sense 4 primary languages. It's as if there's still a conflict between the various dialects. Of course, the population's much larger. So different countries, eventually they were like, all right, I'll select these symbols as my alphabet, and another nation was like, all right, I'll choose these other symbols as my alphabet. But all these symbols are only there to make us be able to communicate reality in an abstract way. That means the purpose of knowledge is not for a person to have like a storage of a mind where they're like, oh yeah, let me find new information and store it. It's not like that. It's in some sense, I would say, the mind is just like the stomach. This is a very strange metaphor to use, but it's just like the stomach, where it is consuming sensory information and translating that as an individual self. Like sometimes when I look at this planet, I'm like, energy, what are you doing? It's as if some people are looking for miracles, not realizing who looks back at them in the mirror is the miracle. Some days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, another day? Like, another evocation into the elemental realm of manifestation as an individual, and then the mind even can go to a point where you're like, why am I here? And then through a neutral context, the attention goes on scan. So I would say pretty much I have lived on this planet every day as a sort of information processing scanner, a biochemical scanner. That means the brain is literally like a candle light, and that light illuminates its spherical awareness to its environment, right? So it's like, as I'm giving this talk right now, who is speaking? It's as if like the world is inside my moment, and at the same time my moment is inside my world. Anyways, I'll keep the focus on the future of capitalism. So what I see, first of all, our understanding of capitalism now, as I've mentioned, as I've spoken so far, should be something as if like a person. So we should see systems actually humanized, right? In a lot of my thinking, and when I speak, people might have noticed that I personify the inanimate sometimes. What that means is I can poetically perceive personality in any object, right? So because in my inner realms, I became detached to the personality, because all our problems were coming from a story of ourselves, and in that story of ourselves, there is a character. That character is your ego, who you are telling yourself you are, right? And most people don't realize that can change, right? And they go on living, as, I don't want to say it, but we are some people on this planet, many, are enslaved by language. Why? Because it is the same as worshiping something, right? People don't realize it, but your attention is your world. If your attention is on an image and it doesn't go away from that image acts like God. This is why when someone is loving, God is love for them. Let's say somebody is evil, God is like wrath for them. I'll give you an example, like Genghis Khan. This guy was such a brutal, mindseted human being, that when he would invade, when he would imagine his giant army invading like kingdoms, when he would invade another kingdom, he would send a message to that kingdom and he would say, I am the wrath of God. And that is the blindness of power, right? Where it begins replacing itself for the totality, but the totality cannot be contained. It is literally like an energy ball where, a lesser dimensional entity consumes but cannot do anything. The energy ball is at a higher level, right? So that means when a human being knows they are present on Earth, the universe in some sense hears a giant step into the room of being, So this hierarchical system, it's role-oriented. We realize we are an outer animal and an inner witness. Pretty much behind your eyes, you are just the whole moment. In front of your eyes, you are the content in the whole moment. A specific relationship with the content in the moment. I see not per se, excuse me, not per se the problem of the political situation of humanity being solved by a new political system. It in some sense becomes solved by a new behavior of the human being with their attention, right? And our attention right now is in some sense finding fiction. Not it's like money is honestly paper, right? I mean, that's the most realist, materialistic sense. Even scientists would agree. Yeah. Money is paper. So money is in some sense paper, but this paper has become more important than, let's say, human life. Where in our civilization, we have violence that tries to take, not realizing what if you're in this world to give. That means any person on this planet, let's say you have lived a life your whole life as a thief, right? It's like, has it ever occurred that could we be here to give rather than take? As if we are here to share something with the world rather than in some sense to utilize the energy just for self-simulation, right? Because really, as the great fictional character Commander Erwin Smith in Shingeki no Kyojin says, he says in referring to himself, he says, "I am replaceable." That means all positions of power are replaceable. It's just greed that keeps, the old being loud. So a new behavior with money will arise if all institutions of power for a second treat the planet as a giant tourist attraction. As if we don't say we are human beings, we say we are how a creature has animated for a certain time in a universe which is so existentially mysterious that we don't even know if time exists. Aliens could, come on Earth, and let's say there's diplomatic relationships with, advanced extraterrestrials, and these extraterrestrials see a human being wearing a Rolex watch, and the extraterrestrial says, "Hey, human being, what's that on your hand?" Right? And we look at the extraterrestrial and we're like, "Oh yeah, we use this to pinpoint time." And then the extraterrestrials would be like, "What do you mean you use it to pinpoint time?" Right? And then we would suddenly realize that time is so unnatural of an idea, that past, present, future, it's like, that's not natural. The being doesn't animate with that, thing. That's epigenetics. That's cultures, shout in our ear. The extraterrestrial would notice that we put time like a box on our head and then feel we're late or whatever. So it's all self-value. That is the secret of this, at least this dimension, this parallel universe of Earth. That yourself is your access to reality. It's like a video game. A person playing a video game, they go into this online video game and they multiplayer online video game, and they log in to their specific characteristic, and believe it or not, we are energy that has logged into a format, into a life form. And there will come a time where we have to log out. That means regardless of what happens in nature, eyes will close, and then we will have to look at life beyond the light that we were so used to. Imagine you are a leader of a nation, whoever you are listening, you could be maybe one day, there's 8 billion people on this planet, various visions inspire all of us, So perhaps, let's say there's this tiny percentage, a very small probability that someone listening to this podcast may go on in the future to become a sort of leader of a nation, right? So the most important thing, I would say, if we entertain this metaphor of the world being a tourist attraction, as if all governments are tourist agencies, then the person has to think, what is more it's, you know what it is, it's like global leadership being like, yo, I'm in charge of a nation, what do I do with it though, right? So this is in certain Eastern countries. So the leader is going to be like, what do I do with this nation, right? And all that you can do is try to enhance the tourist experience of the traveling consciousness in the periodic table. That means attention, unconditional attention is traveling through conditional form. And in some sense, every moment is like a tourist attraction. Every moment of my life, I always find some geometry that fascinates me, you know? And I will tell you that when a human being thinks about the collective, the reason it is one of the smartest approaches is because if the collective succeeds, the individual does too automatically. So if world leaders are like, yo, if we make a civilization that can back itself up, that means, let's say you make a mistake in an advanced civilization, the advanced civilization not only doesn't have the concept of mistake, it in some sense sees everything as feedback. It doesn't matter if you succeeded, that's feedback. It doesn't matter if you failed, that's feedback. Reality is an ever-moving film where you're constantly, you know what it is? It's like a Shakespearean play where behind the curtain, the truth hides. So, when human experience, believe it or not, body language is preaching the social reform we need. They say a person cannot hide who they are when they speak. Any person who speaks for a long time, eventually people will see like that person. They will see who that person is. But what I'm trying to say is that with this attitude that every human citizen has a psychology, and if their psychology is healthy, then their outer realms are healthy. We have a sort of global union, or how would I say it? You know what it is? It's like world leaders, for the first time, not trying to have bigger military budgets in comparison, right? But instead, world leaders trying to, in science fiction work of mine, I wrote this, right? There was a chapter where, in some sense, the world leaders were fighting with each other, but not in regards to who has the better army or power or status or influence in the on the earth. It's more like who has the most incredible nation. That means imagine nations like students, and one nation starts to actually draw art, right? So imagine the first artist that becomes president, and this artist that becomes president, his initial view is just have the most beautiful outer realms, incredible outer realms, so our inner realms have the highest starting point, and then from there whatever progress we make is way ahead than what we could have. So, hilariously, instead of the future there being Big Brother 1984 style, there will be an older brother, where the civilization will feel like the older sibling protecting its citizens, In ancient times, they had such a chill way, such an awesome way of acknowledging life. They looked at the human being, and they saw the human being through a sort of mythological incentive as a sort of relationship between Father Sky and Mother Earth, right? So that was the human animal's whole psychological arena. Stuff moving in space. That is the story of the world, really. One dimension of the story of the world. So, if nations and leaders have this attitude of trying to create the highest quality of tourist-like experience for the human being on earth and society and civilization, is in some sense freedom to find listen to what I'm saying, to find the right resources at the right time. So there is a giant resource misallocation happening. What that means is it's not just one issue, or what do we do with all the talent of people on this planet? The other issue is, what if people who are talented are stuck in the wrong area? And that means, imagine the civilization was like a giant company, right? And suddenly there was an employer, let's say, and this employer comes in the company and sees one employee who has talent for another department is in the wrong department, and literally like a puzzle, the manager begins fixing and putting the right people in the right positions, right? So that's another challenge. Like, after we have freedom, it's like, how do we manage with this freedom? How do 8 billion, like, this is really a riddle, like existential riddle, how do 8 billion human beings manage their eyes on a rock in the middle of nowhere? Like, that is the Hunger Games, truly. Not the Hunger Games, but that is the existential dilemma. Every talk I give ultimately falls into that context. What will happen, of course, something else I didn't mention, is that the educational sector is going to become more like the economical sector, and businesses will become more like schools. So in the future, business and school are the same. They will be, I predict, Why? Because businesses use marketing, right? All businesses have marketing strategies, but they don't understand that education is just pure information in regards to knowledge, right? So human beings have known things and they've passed down what they have known, right? But in the current marketing age, it seems as if like the marketing of companies is kind of like how they would feed an animal. It's like when you want to feed an animal, you make a noise for the animal to notice what's in your hand and to come and eat it, right? So the strategy of marketing currently, I see, in a lot of big companies in the world, it's really this, where it's like pigeon feeding, it's like animal feeding marketing, where you just want to feed something flashy to the customer so the customer remembers your product. But in actuality, marketers will begin to realize, wait a minute, we're living in a world, so the ultimate context of all products is the world. So what needs to occur is, in some sense, what is the relationship of the product or the service with the actual world? And when we come to understand the actual world, we employ techniques and tools of knowledge. Right? That's when knowledge comes in, So marketers will connect with education. So education, and so what it is pretty much cyberspace is like an alien in some sense, and it first is going to enter the business sector, and from the business sector, the educational sector, and eventually a revolutionary movement of man into Cyberman, the era of the cyber human being. Right now, we're in the pioneer phase of that. It's a really cool time to be alive. And of course, guys, keep in mind, I'm just a person sharing a comment. These questions are so complex and so advanced that there is no absolutist perspective. Because if we think the world has to be absolutely in one way, then we judge. Then it's very easy to be rude, cruel, and vicious, because the person's like, I see the world in a certain way, the other person sees it the other way, so who's right? Of course me. And the person's viciousness kind of pours out on, pours out. Right? So human beings have different minds, and unless there is a multidimensional tolerance to observe information, then progress, nothing will evolve. So I feel that eventually media will become the teacher, or become, that means educational systems may become movie theaters in the future, or hologram theaters. Do you know? That means there may be no such thing as teachers in the educational system, let's say 200 years from now. It will probably be like just holograms, either pre-recorded or live. You know, that means a professor gives a lecture and its hologram of the professor in various universities is found on like that stage. Now, when money, when the educational system becomes monetized, imagine, you know, politicians in the future, you know, giving speeches, let's say 100 years from now, being like, you know, the fastest way to get children off the streets and out of like a tragic influence is to make the education have a monetary value, where every child in the future who completes an assignment gets paid by, in some sense, the collective effort of the species. Because the aim is to explore. We can never forget that that's one of the actions that you can do anytime, anywhere, in any moment. You can see what other dimensions hold the meaning of the moment. Sometimes talking about the world is like watching a giant from a distance passing you by and wondering like how much actual input you can have, you know. The giant's perception is way different than the person's perception. The future of capitalism is informational freedom. Informational freedom means a skill that, like, how would I say it? In the future, skill and the things that robots cannot do, let's say talent, will have an incredibly high value. And the aim is to pretty much automate civilization in its rough parts. That means think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we just want to get people above to a point where they get over their physiological needs, and every person can start living their mind's life, and in some sense contributing their great work, you know, to how far, you know, intelligence goes. You know, to think of a one, you know, they say the United Nations, to think of what that would actually look like. It would be a sort of global identity that surpasses culture. That's the only way. For example, climate change, that's a global narrative. You know, that's affecting everybody. People are like, all right, let's talk about climate change, you know. Or if there was a meteor about to hit Earth or something like that, like in movies we see, all the planet will gather, you know, there would be a sort of global unity, right? So it is human context that has to integrate towards a global universal perspective. As Buckminster Fuller said, the universal man. You know, we have to get to a point in society where people are not just identifying with what they see. What we see is an illusion. You know, even René Descartes said when you put a stick in the water, you know, the reflection of the stick makes you feel the stick is curved, but that is not the case. So the sensory realm of stimulus is a very, there's a lot of fallacies, there's a lot of mistakes. You know, the atheistic mind often points this out to the theistic mind, that what we thought was magic, and we realize it is disease, right? So understanding shifted the structure of the meaning of a phenomenon. So a universal understanding that surpasses cultural value. What that means is, it's strange, in the future, we may not be like all nations, may be sub-nations to a greater collective global awareness. Because here's the thing, we either, like candles, wait until death and extinction, so when the light goes out we do nothing, or while we're alive we utilize the outer realm effort towards a direction, right? That's pretty much living. You are being, and as you do, life happens. And beyond information, that's when philosophers will gather around from all parts of the world, the new information era. And we will, as a global community, decide, all right, how long is this game of the ego going forth? For how long are we going to be subjective individualism endlessly reproducing till the end of time, right? So there has to be a sort of, for the mind, a greater revolutionary effort, right? So what I mean by this is that the purpose of the body is continuity. The purpose of the mind is not continuity. Continuity is samsara. The purpose of the mind is poetically transcendence. And transcendence means the cup was filled to the brim, and the next, a water that was poured into the cup made the cup overflow. So there came a surplus of direct experience, regardless of how the past has made the person hold the view of the world. I would like to share a quote from Rabindranath Tagore. This is not the quote I was looking for, but it's one of his quotes. He says, "Life is perpetually creative because it contains in itself this is the actual quote. Life is perpetually creative because it contains in itself that surplus which ever overflows the boundaries of the immediate time and space, restlessly pursuing its adventure of expression in the varied forms of self-realization." So believe it or not, every day a person wakes up from the unconscious into a conscious waking state as a life form. That's, you're realizing yourself again, right? So it's all about our relationship with the void, and then how much we choose to see intelligence here, right? And how deeply we choose to see intelligence here. For example, through the existential atheistic mind of Sartre, for him, the essence, there was no essence. The surface and the essence were the same, right? So the exoteric and the esoteric were the same. The essence-oriented, component, and the expression-oriented component, right? So that means it's as if really what's going on this planet, it's just singular perspectives are living alongside multidimensional perspectives, and we're thinking, how do we build a society for everybody, right? And the only solution would be such a multidimensional tolerance that even if we make mistakes, we pilot onwards towards the updating of the whole thing, right? Because what else can you do in this life? Your eyes are open and you just go forth. Philosophers will wonder in the future what will happen to not only the idea of an animal in a space-time continuum, but the actuality of the animal. Because we have various different kinds of beings, and we can say, so what's happening? Human beings are being born, and like cameras, they are recording their culture, their environment. They're becoming an identity out of all the accumulated information, and they go on living in the world as an individual, you know, feeling too small to change the collective. But the mind, like if our dimensions are multidimensional, we cannot ignore multidimensional context. We cannot ignore a multidimensional context to society, right? So it's like saying, if something has levels, if a system is hierarchical, it is infinitely hierarchical, you know, because of the interdependence of phenomena in the world. In the subtitle, I've written Relationship of Money and Information. Companies, you know, I see videos on YouTube about this, like companies spend a lot of money on information. Every like major company has a research department. And that research department uses the funds of the company to try to find the space where the company can expand into and grow. And it's the same with civilization, where the inner realms of human beings looks at civilization, and that light beam of the human intelligence going through that object. In some sense, the world is a canvas, and how it has been painted so far has been primarily by our ancestors, which I have called Civilization 1.0. There's many ancient ideas, like it's shocking, even though we say 2021, yeah, modernity, we try to celebrate that way, but it's impossible because there are so many ancient ideas just in the streets of mankind. The system has certain ancient components, Ancient ideas are ruling the world, even though the people of antiquity are gone, but their mind's influence still remains. Like when I see, for example, Iran, a country that religion is in the law, so that would be a sort of thing where it's as if ideology from a past era is in some sense defining the freedom of a new era, right? So there's so many things in life that I can tell you, it's just the old don't want to let go, and the future are not bold enough to know their own value. At some point in life, emptiness will be acknowledged, and the person has to make a decision on what goes on here in their inner realms. That decision becomes life. And of course, it's not that we need to understand things through language, because language is not true understanding. You know what that means? If somebody tells you they skydived, they are not giving you the experience of skydiving. The experience of skydiving is only you can go through it, right? And it's the same with all these concepts of even enlightenment, nirvana, the ultimate state of man's intelligence. It's like, right now we're living in a moment in history where freedom has a price. That means if you live for the greater freedom of the species, its price is in some sense not experienced. So, it's kind of crazy. It's like a person wanting to improve but not wanting to forget the past. And it's as if what kind of psychology, is found. Before money, there was a bartering system. So what it means is it's as if an idea became the middleman between a direct exchange. So life in the future has pretty much two options. Either it's going to become more an illusion, or it's going to become it's pretty much simple and complex. It can become more simpler if we make giant mistakes, let's say Mad Max kind of scenario, that life becomes simple, but it becomes, disadvantageous in regards to the potential we have. So in the new information era, that would be the first time we will start living as multidimensional beings in the world. And language has deeper dimensions to it. So what that means is, after the first alphabet, why weren't there any other letters? Even the letter Z is wondering, why did nobody come after me? So what it is language stopped evolving. A shape was accepted. This shape has been used for a very long time. Now somebody has come and started a podcast where he's saying, hey, reality has an old shape. How about every person's new input evolves it? As if kind of ushering the species towards an era where, as we communicate in ways that our ancestors never could, we give momentum to nature's conscious relationship with all systems in front of it, right? Because in the future there will come cyber interference. Technology is like, first it was a far away, then it became a phone you held in your hand, then it became headphones, and eventually it might go into your head, right? So technology may try to invade the biological kingdom in some sense, and that's very risky. I personally would say that it's kind of like this, that you're a natural being. If something unnatural takes place, the person will not trust themselves as a natural being, right? So the person wants sort of being devoid of unnatural interference. For the final brush strokes of the talk, what I'm trying to paint here, it's just this attention that there's a sort of ever-changing universe. There's like the universe is changing. Inside that change, stories have taken place. These stories have become laws and regulations of systems and reality, and the only way the story can change is through human involvement. Right? That means the more human beings care about civilization, the more there is a human presence in civilization. But imagine the human beings become so ignorant of the future that they're like, we'll just create an advanced AI, and that advanced AI will build the advanced civilization for us. All we have to do is just like walk in nature till the end of time, but I'm telling you, it in some sense, even though that is a possibility, that we create a technology that has a way more advanced algorithm and approach to the problem than we do, right? That in the sense that it can solve it, but either we walk towards emptiness, either we walk towards oneness, which means complete dissolution of all individual psychology. That means sometimes I feel when spiritual people say the whole universe is love, or everything is one moment, man, or everything is just oneness, I'll tell you, it's as if saying there never was people from the beginning. That's the chaotic reality of true mystical experience. When you begin getting glimpses of the dehumanized, every person has a sort of threshold. Not everybody can look at emptiness just for hours on end, right? That's something where not every mind can do. Every mind has the potential to do, but not every person is inspired to do. As if we're all different antennas meant to receive different signals of the realm and then live by these signals, so that when we look at life, we realize our participation was towards something. Right now, it's like abstraction. It's as if the kids in the classroom are fighting over who gets to sit where in the classroom, but suddenly the teacher walks in, and the teacher is the unknown possibilities of extinction and advanced evolution. right? And so when the teacher shouts that look at the problem in the moment, all the students for a moment forget who they are and they see what the problem is. And in that instant where you see the reality of something, it means your inner realms have become still like a pond, and what your eyes saw was how nature moves, in the sense of, like, sometimes I feel I am in the imagination of higher dimensions, or how Chung Tzu, this concept came to him in the sense of, also, like, this dude dreamed he was a butterfly. He woke up, his disciples are like, Chung Tzu, why are you freaking out? And Chung Tzu's like, guys, I had a dream I was a butterfly. I don't know if I was the butterfly dreaming I'm a Zen master, or I'm a Zen master dreaming I'm a butterfly, right? So this was like a big deal for this human being, Chung Tzu, in history, right? And he was in some sense suggesting the intensity of reality in accordance to the vehicle that we choose to drive, right? That means it's very fascinating that when you see, for example, a spiritual person, they are driving a vehicle that is in some sense faith in the whole moment's appearance. In some sense, there was a story of this yogi who had lived in this ashram, and this yogi was so innocently passive in his meditation. He was just so simple and just so calm that even when a leaf fell, he would just let the wind blow it. He wouldn't even touch a leaf. That means he tried to live in, like some people in this life attempt a sort of a life algorithm where they try to actually be detached from everything to see what is left, right? That is a strategy, But the issue is, it's all about what will happen to the human personality, and that is unknown. Global events change our psychology, right? People were living normal lives. The coronavirus comes in like the Black Plague, reincarnating. So in some sense, it's as if a sort of natural event changes the psychology of so many human beings. That means nature is also part of the leadership of how human beings respond to the realm. If the weather is bad, you don't go outside. If the future is empty, you don't try, to live for it. The neo-information era and the future of capitalism is actually the future of language and how a species exists through it. As we can understand that we are not thoughts, we are not language, it is, when we say we're a thought, that is a multi-layered declaration, in the sense that there is a sense of who we are behind our eyes, and there's a sense of who we are in front of our eyes. And how, who we are in front of our eyes, based on how that moves, it suggests how the inner realms were kept. So if I make a mistake in this talk, that means for a moment in my inner realms, my attention wasn't to, for example, myself. All right. So there is the future of capitalism is the future of human value. And the future of human value is skill as the expression of the new known in the unknown. Right? So imagine an advanced civilization of skillful, healthy, and multidimensional human beings. Right? That would be an incredible civilization. Right? A civilization that is tired of, for how long, good, bad, this chaotic judgment, even though duality is a part of this world, but it's for how long are we going to go, okay, that was good, that was bad, that was good. Top hats were good back in the day in England. A person wearing top hat now is odd, an oddity, right? So there is no such thing as normal. There is just a landscape that is changing, and as we identify with it, we become a vehicle of meaning to function towards some individualistic aim. And of course, there is no belief game anymore. There is no right or wrong in a singular infinite or a singular changing infinitum. You know what I mean? Or some sort of container of the infinite, as if change is the container of infinity. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful, and much blessings and namaste. And actually, for 2 minutes, I'll just look at the chat section in case anybody has a question or wants to challenge a certain proposition of mine in this episode. We are in this world once, and every person should wonder about their collective responsibility. It is your birthright to wonder about how a collective system and the possibility of a collective movement will look like. We have seen so much failure in history, but we have never seen the proper success of a global movement. Right? We have never seen something of the like. And in this cyberspace era, our minds have a stage to, in some sense, march into, a battlefield to march into. Of self was forgotten for a moment. What would be looking at what? And that is where the ultimate resides, I find. A clue towards the ultimate perception. Anyways, guys, the future of capitalism could be that all systems change and they integrate. So its future could be integrative, or just the attention of human beings will go somewhere else. Either an outer realm change or an inner realm change. And eventually greater visions and greater minds will enter the world and contribute to the system. Everybody can, in like a Rubik's Cube that takes a lifetime to solve, it's as if every person should wonder about the future of the species and then wonder about their participation in the world, or how they pilot in this realm. Because if we don't care for the future of humanity, it's like, why are we honoring our ancestors? Why are so many people going for prayer and all of this, in the sense of trying to honor the past, but we don't give a shit about the future, so this is unacceptable. And what this new age community, at least did something of disconnecting with the past to come to the awareness of the here and now, but the here and now doesn't help the individual human, right? That means I know that there are states of selflessness that one can be just pure being, but I will tell you, it is one life's opportunity to just be a human being and function in the collective manner. Designers, the savior of humanity is designers. I am convinced. Design is the most important thing to know, because everything has it. We are, even right now when I look at my consciousness, I get a bit emotional. Why? Because I am just a spherical container of a certain range of geometry, and this world has so much unknown geometry and complexity to it that it's as if we're the tip of the iceberg, how can we from the tip of the iceberg have an opinion on all the hidden depths of reality, But to itself, the iceberg is a mountain. The tip of the iceberg is a mountain to itself. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening, honestly. And without compassion, the species can't go anywhere. Blessings.